Welcome back. And if you're new here, welcome to Veterinary Epidemiology. I'm so glad you're here. This is Module 2, and today we're diving into one of the most clinically relevant and honestly one of the most exam-heavy topics in the entire series, vaccine epidemiology. Now, when most of us think about vaccines, we think about individual patients, that puppy coming in for its first parvo shot or the beef cow herd getting their annual BVD booster. But in epidemiology, we zoom way out. We're thinking at the population level, and that shift in perspective changes everything about how we evaluate, design, and deploy vaccination programs. In this module, we're going to cover three major pillars. First, we'll work through how we actually measure whether a vaccine works and why that's more complicated than it sounds. Second, we'll unpack herd immunity, what it means mathematically, what thresholds we need to hit, and why those numbers matter for disease eradication. And third, we'll get into the real-world challenges of applying all of this in field conditions, from remote large animal practice to emergency outbreak response. If you're studying for your NAVLE or sitting for your ACVPM boards, I want you to know right now, this material shows up. It shows up a lot. So let's make sure you've got it locked down. Let's get started with the foundational question. Does this vaccine actually work? And how do we measure that? Here's the first place where a lot of students, and honestly, a lot of practitioners, get tripped up. Vaccine efficacy and vaccine effectiveness are not the same thing, and that distinction is absolutely exam-worthy. Vaccine efficacy is measured under ideal controlled conditions. Think randomized controlled trials, challenge studies in the laboratory, blinded protocols, perfectly selected animals. It answers the question, how well does this vaccine perform when everything goes right? Vaccine effectiveness, on the other hand, is measured out in the real world, in field populations, with natural exposure, real-world handling, heterogeneous animals, and all the messiness that comes with actual practice. So effectiveness is almost always lower than efficacy, and that gap is meaningful. We use for both, and you need to know this, is VE equals ARU minus ARV divided by ARU times 100%. Here's an ACVPM exam tip. Exam scenarios will often give you attack rates and ask you to calculate VE, or give you VE and ask you to interpret it. Make sure you know which group is which. ARU goes in the denominator. A VE of 0% means the vaccine has no effect. A negative VE means the vaccinated group actually had more disease, a red flag for vaccine safety or study bias. Now that we know how to measure whether a vaccine works, let's talk about the types of trials we use to generate that evidence in the first place. We know efficacy and effectiveness are different things. The natural next question is, which study designs actually measure each one? Because on the boards, you will be handed a study description and asked whether it measures efficacy or effectiveness, and this design to measure mapping is the key to getting it right. Start with the randomized controlled trial. The RCT is your efficacy engine. Animals are randomly assigned to vaccine or placebo, dosing is verified, and the cold chain is controlled. Think of a BRD vaccine challenge trial in feedlot cattle. Randomization balances out the confounders, which is why the RCT is the gold standard for licensure and the one design here that measures efficacy. The other three measure effectiveness, real-world performance. A cohort study follows groups forward in time. Take commercial dairy herds, sort them by vaccination status, and compare disease incidence as it unfolds. A case control study works backward. You start with diseased and non-diseased animals and look back at vaccination history. It is efficient for rare severe outcomes like rabies post-exposure cases, and you estimate VE as 1 minus the odds ratio. The fourth is the screening method, sometimes called the Farrington method. It combines the proportion of cases that were vaccinated with overall population coverage to estimate effectiveness rapidly during an active outbreak. No prospective cohort required. Here's an ACVPM exam tip. Memorize the mapping. RCT, efficacy. Cohort case control and screening method, effectiveness. For a cohort, VE equals 1 minus RR. For a case control, VE equals 1 minus OR. Each design trades precision for practicality, so expect a scenario that asks you to pick the right one. Designs give us the numbers, but the real world keeps pulling effectiveness below efficacy. Let's look at the specific factors that widen that gap. This almost always comes in below efficacy. This slide is the why. There are 6 factors I want you to be able to rattle off because any one of them can quietly erode real-world performance. First, antigenic match. The circulating strain has to match the vaccine strain. Influenza is the classic example. A strain mismatch sharply cuts VE even when you administer the vaccine perfectly. Second, cold chain integrity. Temperature excursions degrade live attenuated vaccines fast. A vaccine sitting in a warm truck cooler can lose potency before it ever reaches the animal. Third, maternal antibody interference. In young animals, passively acquired maternal antibodies can neutralize the vaccine antigen before the active immune response has a chance to develop. Fourth, immunosuppression. BVD, malnutrition, and concurrent disease all blunt the response. A compromised immune system simply cannot mount the protection the trial efficacy assumed. Fifth, timing and schedule. Incorrect prime boost intervals or vaccinating too close to exposure prevent adequate immune memory from forming. Label compliance here is non-negotiable. And 6, route of administration. Intramuscular, intranasal, subcutaneous, each elicits a different local and systemic immune profile. The wrong route means the wrong immunity for the site of infection. Here's a key concept. Every one of these 6 pushes the gap between controlled trial efficacy and field effectiveness wider. When you see a vaccine underperforming in practice, run this list before you ever conclude the product itself is ineffective. These individual level factors set up the population level question. Once enough animals are protected, something powerful happens across the whole herd. Let's talk about herd immunity. This is one of the concepts I want you to feel genuinely comfortable with, not just recognize on a multiple choice question. Herd immunity is the point at which enough individuals in a population are immune through vaccination or prior infection that the pathogen can no longer sustain transmission. And that protects everybody, including the animals who can't be vaccinated. The formula is elegant and simple. HC equals 1 minus 1 divided by R naught, where R naught is the basic reproduction number, which is the average number of new infections generated by a single infectious individual in a fully susceptible population. The higher the R naught, the more transmissible the pathogen and the higher the proportion of the population you need to immunize. Let's look at some real numbers. FMD has an extremely high threshold, meaning you need to vaccinate the vast majority of susceptible animals in an area before you break transmission. That's why FMD outbreaks are so devastating and so difficult to contain with vaccination alone. 2 important limitations to flag here. The formula assumes homogeneous mixing, that every animal has an equal chance of contact with every other animal. In real populations, that's rarely true. Spatial clustering, biosecurity barriers, and movement patterns all create heterogeneity, meaning local susceptible pockets can sustain transmission even when average population immunity exceeds HC. Here's an ACVPM exam tip. You will almost certainly be given an R0 value and asked to calculate HC. Practice this calculation until it's automatic. Example, R0 equals 5, HC equals 1 minus 1 over 5 equals 1 minus 0.2 equals 0.8 or 80%. Also be prepared to explain why unvaccinated individuals are protected once HC is achieved. So, we've set the population level targets, but who exactly benefits when we hit them? It's not only the vaccinated animals. Let's break down direct versus indirect protection. Distinction that's easy to overlook, but genuinely important. When a vaccine protects, who is it actually protecting? There are two answers, and strong vaccination programs depend on both. First, direct protection. This is the vaccinated individual. The animal's own immune response is primed to neutralize the pathogen on exposure. This is exactly what vaccine efficacy measures. The outcome in vaccinated animals compared with unvaccinated controls, the kind of individual level result we get out of a randomized controlled trial. Second, indirect protection, the herd effect. This is the part trials don't capture. When vaccinated animals stop amplifying and shedding the pathogen, there are simply fewer exposure events across the whole population. Transmission chains get interrupted, the effective reproduction number falls below 1, and unvaccinated animals are shielded even though they never got the shot. Picture two calves. A vaccinated calf doesn't develop clinical BRD after challenge. That's direct protection, the vaccine working at the individual level. Now, an unvaccinated calf on a well-vaccinated farm is also at lower risk because its neighbors are no longer shedding virus into the shared environment. That's indirect protection. Here's the key concept. Total protection is direct plus indirect. If you judge a program only on individual level VE from trials, you systematically underestimate its true value because the herd effect never shows up in that number. Protection is the upside, but every vaccine also carries risk. So let's turn the equation over and talk about how we measure vaccine safety. Time on whether vaccines work. Now, the other side of the equation, are they safe? And just like efficacy, safety has formal epidemiologic measures you need to know cold. Start with vaccine attributable risk, or VAR. It's the rate of adverse events in vaccinated animals minus the rate in unvaccinated animals. That subtraction matters. VAR is an absolute measure of harm actually caused by the vaccine, not a relative one. How do we detect those adverse events in the first place? Reporting systems. In the USDA APHIS Center for Veterinary Biologics collects adverse event reports. It's the veterinary parallel to VAERS on the human side, but it's passive surveillance, so significant underreporting is a known inherent limitation. Treat it as a tool for signal detection, not for precise rates. Next, number needed to harm, NNH. It's 1 divided by VAR, and it parallels number needed to treat on the benefit side. It answers a practical question. How many animals must be vaccinated to cause a single adverse event? A higher NNH means rarer harm, which means a safer profile. Finally, you have to put these together in a benefit risk framework. High NNT, a large absolute benefit, paired with high NNH, rare harm, is a favorable profile. But context is everything. A rare fatal adverse event might be perfectly acceptable for a uniformly fatal disease and completely unacceptable for a disease with 2% mortality. Here's an ACVPM exam tip. Keep the formula straight. VAR equals AR vaccinated minus AR unvaccinated, and NNH equals 1 divided by VAR. Expect to weigh benefit against risk in a scenario where the right answer depends on how severe the disease being prevented actually is. Safety and efficacy describe the vaccine itself. Next, a clever design problem. How do we tell a vaccinated animal apart from a naturally infected one? That's where marker vaccines come in. These advanced concepts that looks intimidating but rests on a really elegant idea. DIVA stands for differentiating infected from vaccinated animals, and it solves a problem that vaccination itself creates. Here's the problem. In most disease programs, a positive serology result is ambiguous. The animal could be vaccinated or it could be naturally infected, and you can't tell which. That means you can't certify disease freedom in a population that vaccinates, and under OIE/WOA standards, that can cost a country its trade status. DIVA fixes this with a marker vaccine. The vaccine deliberately lacks one or more antigens that are present in the field virus. Then a companion diagnostic, typically an ELISA, looks for antibodies to that missing antigen. If the animal has them, it was naturally infected. If it doesn't, it was only vaccinated. Protect the animal, certify the herd. Two field examples make this concrete. In FMD, non-structural protein DIVA vaccines let national surveillance programs separate infected from vaccinated animals. And pseudorabies used a GE-deleted vaccine paired with a GE antibody test. Any GE-positive pig in a vaccinated herd is, by definition, naturally infected. That was the cornerstone of the U.S. pseudorabies eradication program. Here's a key principle. Without DIVA, countries face an ugly choice: vaccinate or keep trade status. A marker vaccine plus its companion diagnostic test let them do both, which is exactly why this is such a high-yield policy concept for the boards. We now have every building block: measurement, thresholds, protection, safety, and surveillance. Let's put them together and actually design a population-level vaccination program that ties the whole module together, and it maps almost exactly onto how the boards frame a program design question. 6 steps, and notice the split. The first 4 are math. The last 2 are where programs actually succeed or fail. Step 1, define the goal. Are you aiming for control, elimination, or eradication? That choice alone drives how much coverage you'll need and what strategy makes sense. Step 2, know your R naught. Calculate the herd immunity threshold for your pathogen in your target population using PC equals 1 minus 1 divided by R naught. Step 3, know your VE. Estimate vaccine efficacy from trials or field studies and adjust it for your population's real characteristics and cold chain reality. Remember, field VE runs lower than trial efficacy. Step 4, calculate required coverage. Divide the threshold by efficacy. Coverage equals PC divided by VE. And here's the gut check. That number can exceed 100%, which is your signal that vaccination alone can't get you there. Step 5, design the delivery system. Who vaccinates? What schedule? How do you hold the cold chain and monitor compliance and label adherence? This is the operational reality. Step 6, monitor and evaluate. Track both inputs and outputs, vaccination coverage and disease incidence, and adjust when coverage lags or VE comes in lower than you hoped. Here's a key insight. Steps 1 through 4 are the arithmetic. Steps 5 and 6 are where programs live or die. You can't improve what you don't measure, so always track input coverage alongside output incidence. Let's pull everything together now with a big picture review and these specific exam callouts you need to have locked in before we move on. We've covered a lot of ground, and every piece of it is both clinically relevant and exam relevant. Let's consolidate the big picture into the 5 things you absolutely need walking out of this module. 1, the VE formula. Vaccine efficacy equals attack rate of the unvaccinated minus attack rate vaccinated divided by attack rate unvaccinated, which is the same as 1 minus RR. It measures relative risk reduction. It's a ratio, not a guarantee of protection. 2, efficacy under ideal trial conditions is always greater than or equal to effectiveness in the field. Cold chain, population diversity, and strain mismatch all erode real-world performance. 3, the population math. The herd immunity threshold, PC equals 1 minus 1 divided by R naught, and required coverage, PC divided by VE, know these cold. You will be asked to calculate them. 4, the regulatory dimension. Marker and DIVA vaccine let vaccinated populations still certify disease freedom, the bridge between herd protection and trade status. 5, benefit versus risk. Weigh absolute benefit, number needed to treat, against harm, number needed to harm. Context decides what's acceptable. A rare adverse event may be fine for a uniformly fatal disease. Vaccine epidemiology is explicitly tested on the ACVPM board exam. VE calculation, herd immunity thresholds, and vaccination program design. Know your formulas cold. VE equals 1 minus RR, PC equals 1 minus 1 divided by R naught, and coverage equals PC divided by VE. Here's a closing note. Thank you for working through this vaccine epidemiology module with me. If it helped, please like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel reach more veterinary students who need this content. Up next, we move into One Health, the human-animal environment interface. I'll see you there.